Well, good morning, friends. It has been a fast 8 weeks. I have enjoyed being here as your interim pastor, and I appreciate your welcoming me into this role. While I've been here, many of you have reached out in various ways to ask me to take some time at some point to talk about the work of the Nehemiah mission. And so I decided that that would be my message today on this, my last Sunday with you. I do get asked to speak throughout the conference, and as I do that, I am really reticent to just go somewhere and do a commercial. Uh, I think it's important that people know about the Nehemiah mission and that they get a good connection between what we do and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I try to do a hybrid kind of message that, again, isn't just a commercial for the message for the mission. So I will do that this morning, and I hope that it answers many of your questions and that it becomes the basis for what might become a partnership or opportunities for Good Shepherd to serve in the urban community through the Nehemiah mission. So I'm going to start off by scaring you because what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the United Methodist Book of Discipline. Oh, that sounds weighty, doesn't it? But don't panic. It'll go by quickly, and I think that you will appreciate what the Book of Discipline has to say about mission and service. And so here are these words from the United Methodist Book of Discipline, Mission and Service section. We insist that personal salvation always involves Christian mission and service to the world. By joining heart and hand, we assert that personal religion, evangelical witness, and Christian social action are reciprocal and mutually reinforcing. Scriptural holiness entails more than personal piety. Love of God is always linked with love of neighbor, a passion for justice, and renewal in the life of the world. The general rules represent one traditional expression of intrinsic relationship between Christian life and thought as understood within the Wesleyan tradition. And then our friend Micah asks the question, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? Well, I've always loved that scripture. I find the words to be particularly beautiful and comforting. I find them to be instructive and compelling. I also find the words, depending on the translation that we read from, to be a little curious. You see, I understand walking humbly with God. It means that we don't have all the answers. We walk humbly knowing that we may be wrong sometimes about things. And sometimes we may be wrong about the things that we think we know the most about. Well, I'm not real good at it. I understand humility. And I hope that if I can be humble with anyone, that at least I would be humbly walking with God. I think I get the requirement of doing justice. And as hard as I try, sometimes my version of justice might actually make my "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet get really heavy. So while I may not always be good at it, I understand fairly well what it means to do justice. The phrase that trips me up, or that I struggle with, is specifically to love mercy. If it said, be merciful, I could understand that. But to love mercy is kind of a different requirement. Well, I will tell you that several summers ago now, we had a large group of short-term mission team in-house at the mission. And like others, they were spending a solid week with us. And I had them busy working on projects both in and outside of the mission. And they had all just departed for their various work project sites. And I was in the building alone when I heard a knock on the door. And I went to the door and was surprised by a visit from my Uncle Ralph. Uncle Ralph was a retired United Methodist minister from here in Cleveland. He spent his entire ministry doing urban ministry. And at the same time, he was a history major when he was in college, and so he was quite the historian. And he came by that day just to check in on what his nephew was up to. And so we walked around the mission, and we talked about it, and we talked about the United Methodist Church and its rich history of mission, and we talked about John Wesley. And then we talked specifically about John Wesley's foundry. Now, if you're not familiar with John Wesley's foundry, let me just suggest that the next time you pick up a United Methodist hymnal, page through it, and down in the bottom right corner, you may start to see every once in a while the words "from the Foundry Collection." That would indicate that hymn, or the text from that hymn, was part of what was being used in John Wesley's original foundry for worship. In 1739, Wesley was looking for a place that he could use for worship and study. He also wanted it to be a space that could serve as a center for ministry to the poor. The building he chose was a former arsenal, which had been ruined by an accidental explosion several years earlier. I thought that was interesting. He leased the building and fixed it up as best as he could. But this building that Wesley and his Methodists referred to as the Foundry was in constant need of repair. The preaching room had space for 1,500 people. The band room, and I want to explain that bands were not musical bands. They were small groups. They were small gathering groups. The band room seated another 300. One area was used as a classroom, another as a book room, and above the band room was an apartment where Wesley brought his mother Susanna to live in her declining years. He held his first service in the building on November 11th, 1739, and later wrote, "I preached at 8 a.m. to 5,000 or 6,000 on the spirit of bondage and the spirit of adoption, and again at 5 in the evening in the place which had been the king's foundry for cannon." And then he adds, "O hasten thou the time when nation shall not learn war any more." The foundry was the headquarters of Methodism for 38 years, as well as the center of many charitable agencies, including a dispensary of food, clothing, a shelter for poor widows, a school for children of the poor, literacy programs for adults and children, and free medical clinics for the poor. Well, my uncle discussed this little bit of United Methodist history as if he had lived it, and of course his entire ministry was devoted to serving the inner city, so in many ways he had lived it. In fact, as he attended seminary, his local church connection was to People's Hope United Methodist Church, which is now, believe it or not, the site of the Nehemiah Mission. And as he talked about John Wesley's foundry and we continued our tour of the mission, he suddenly stopped. He took my hand and he smiled and he said, "You know what you have here? This is John Wesley's foundry." You know, if you haven't picked up on it in these last 8 weeks, Wesley is kind of a hero to me. There were some things about him that weren't so pleasant, but overall he was an amazing individual. I had never thought of the Nehemiah Mission in this way. I certainly never saw myself as another John Wesley. But it felt good to hear him say that, and it was suddenly hard to walk humbly, because I was really proud of the work that we do there. And it is a mission that is born out of the tradition of John Wesley. And of course, out of the story of Nehemiah, as he rebuilt Jerusalem. So let me tell you a little bit about what I'm so proud of, what we currently do. We operate a very small but effective food and personal hygiene pantry. It serves those who come to the door with immediate need, someone who's just been released from prison, or perhaps is coming out of a rehab program, or finds themselves suddenly homeless. We sponsor a Boy Scout troop. It's one of the oldest in the city. We partner with agencies like Habitat for Humanity and Trials for Hope, Laura's Home, and the City Mission. And what we do is we provide volunteers for their programs. Those volunteers come from the groups that visit us and spend anywhere from a day to a couple of weeks with us and do outreach into the city. We're currently partnered with the Metanoia Project to provide temporary emergency shelter to homeless individuals. So on a nightly basis, we might have 10 to 15 chronically homeless folks who come to us for shelter. We've assisted hundreds and hundreds of people by making repairs to their homes, by building wheelchair ramps, cleaning yards, painting houses, and building playgrounds. The assistance for getting that work done has come from over 14,000 short-term visiting missionaries who came to Cleveland to stay with us and then work in and around the city. And together, those volunteers have completed over 1,400 work projects. We offer a Tuesday night community meal called Bread on Bridge, which is a reference to our street location, 6515 Bridge Avenue. Now, Bread on Bridge is currently suspended because of COVID, but when it is in operation, Bread on Bridge is something that is open to anyone and everyone to come and get a great meal and engage in conversation about topics of the day or scripture. And everyone and anyone is both welcome and does attend. We have people who are white and black, Hispanic, African, homeless, and middle class from the suburbs, straight and gay. Some nights there are as many as 60 people there, and some nights maybe only 10. But many of these people consider Bread on Bridge, or Bob as we call it, to be their church. We sponsor an outreach ministry to the homeless who live in camps around the city. It's called the Luke 3:11 Project. And it came about because one day, a few years ago, I was driving into the mission on I-71, and I was thinking about an Advent sermon I was writing based on Luke 3:11, where John the Baptist is proclaiming the coming of the Messiah. And the people asked him, what do we do now? And you'll recall from last week's sermon that his answer was, if you have an extra coat, give it to one who has none. And if you have extra food, give it to those who have no food. And as I thought about those words and how I was going to preach on that message, I looked to my right and there was a pickup truck pulling a concession trailer. And my brain just processed that and said, concession trailer. And then I exited the freeway at Denison Avenue. And standing in that corner was an obviously homeless man. And he was holding up a sign that said simply this, smile. And it hit me. What if we had a concession trailer and we partnered with local churches who would prepare meals, load them onto that concession trailer, and go right to the homeless camps? Within a few days, we launched that ministry. We had 6 churches immediately come on board, and to date, we've served almost 5,000 meals. We literally destroyed the first concession trailer and had to purchase another one. Now, there's been some attrition due to COVID and other issues. So we right now have 4 churches that are active. The need is really great, folks, and we would love to have you involved. Beginning next month, we'll be hosting 2 weekly 12-step programs. 3 years ago, we were feeling called to create a ministry focused on the kids in our neighborhood. We didn't know what it would look like. We didn't know how to put it together. We didn't know how to get the word out or what we would even do with it. But we were praying about this need that we were feeling when suddenly we were visited by a middle-aged couple, Chuck and Joanne. They happened to stumble on one of our staff people who was working in the front yard, and they asked who we were and what we did, and she explained our programs and explained that they had started a Bible study in their home at the request of about 6 to 8 African refugee children they were familiar with. Those children had asked for Bible instruction. Well, that Bible study had grown to over 20 children, and they were looking for a larger place to meet with the kids. The kids who referred to Chuck and Joanne as Grandma and Grandpa. Within an hour, we had an agreement with them that they would be hosted in our building, and the numbers grew. 30 days later, they had not 20 children, they had 40 children, and a couple months after that, they were over 100. My only full-time employee, Becky, took over the program, and together with Grandma and Grandpa, the program has evolved and now includes sewing classes, soccer teams, cooking classes, gardening, homework help, tutoring, and special field trips. While COVID has hindered the program, we've made adjustments, and the kids and their families are still being served, and relationships are being built that are having a tremendous long-term effect on that very special community. I could devote an entire session just on Corner 65 or have Becky come here and talk to you just about Corner 65 as it's becoming the major focus of our mission. We are always in need of mentors and tutors, chaperones, teachers. We would love to have members of Good Shepherd on our team to help in all of these areas. So thinking about all of this and being pretty pleased with the work we're doing, when my uncle talked about John Wesley's foundry, humility was difficult. But when I started to think about the great need that exists in our city and cities like ours, and the stories that need to be altered by the loving touch of outreach inspired by the call of Christ, I'm humbled again. There's so many stories. I'll share with you a few. An autistic child who was unable to play in his own yard because of a dilapidated neighbor's fence and that neighbor's pit bull. And now, due to the work of a group of adults and teens from southern Ohio who repaired that fence, built a new fence around the property, the little boy is able to enjoy his yard again. And what I realized is that they did this because they loved mercy. I remember Miss Holly, 87 years old, living alone in the heart of central Cleveland, in the second worst neighborhood in the state. She saw our work team as a gift from God. That team spent the day cleaning up her yard and repairing her roof. Most importantly, a 16-year-old girl from the team who shared the same birthday as Miss Holly, spent the day just visiting with her. And when it was time to leave, they hugged each other and promises were made to stay in touch, and that has been maintained. I received a letter from a widow on East 97th Street who stated that in painting her home and cleaning up her yard, we accomplished something that none of her 200 living relatives either would or could do. We've had multiple families that we've serviced who lost everything in a fire, but were then able to move into new apartments furnished by donations that we acquired from people who love mercy. I recall a group of teenagers pooling their money to purchase flooring for a family that had nothing but subfloors in their tiny home. And then there was a group of teens from Alliance, Ohio. They pooled their money to buy beds for the children of a family that had been sleeping on plywood covered with soiled cloth. Those kids loved mercy. Christ's work is witnessed as Becky and her small team of volunteers bring hope to a community of African refugee children who want nothing extravagant. They just want relationship, and they want a chance, not to receive, but they want a chance to contribute to this new society they have become a part of. This is the work of God, being done by people of God who love mercy and walk humbly. The 14,000 or so missionaries who have come to Cleveland and worked with the Nehemiah Mission, and countless churches and individuals who support us financially, they don't do this out of religious obligation. They do it because they love mercy. John Wesley and the early Methodists did not do their work out of duty. They did it because they loved mercy. So I tell you this. What happened in the foundry didn't stay in the foundry. It reappears in mission stations like the Nehemiah Mission all around the globe. We just happen to be in your backyard. Micah asks, what does the Lord require? And we answer. The section of the United Methodist Book of Discipline that discusses distinctive Wesleyan emphasis stresses the relationship between personal salvation and social action. John Wesley understood that we are all broken, and it is only God's mercy that holds us together. Our social action is born of our own experience of God's mercy. Wesley insisted that we love because God first loved us. We are merciful because God has shown mercy to us. And if we can love God's mercy, we can love being merciful to others, not out of duty or obligation, but because we love mercy. And what does the Lord require? But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. Amen.